Welcome to Rocket Ship, the podcast where web developers learn the skills and secrets to ship awesome apps. I'm Simon Grimm, creator of Galaxies.dev, and if you're watching this video, you already see today's guest, which is Thor, who has worked as Stripe and is currently the Rel and DX guy at Supabase. Welcome, Thor.
Thanks, Simon. Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I was just waving, doing the Asian peace sign.
The funny thing about Thor is, first of all, the first time I met Thor online, we talked for like 15 minutes until Thor said a word. And I was like, nobody who's not from Germany can say that word this way. You're from Germany. And then we switched over to German. Actually, you're from Germany. And there's a second realization I had barely minutes before this podcast. So I kept telling my wife and everyone that, I'm doing a podcast with Thor. And they're like, oh, that's such a cool name. And then I looked into LinkedIn. And I got to tell this to people. Now it's official. Thor is actually running by the very boring German name Thorsten.
Thorsten.
So how did you came up with Thor? Like, when did you adopt that?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, Thorsten, in Germany, totally fine. Everyone knows that name, knows how to pronounce it. But I found actually, it was when I was studying abroad in Ireland, in Dublin. I was doing Erasmus kind of back during my studies. And I found that people were struggling to, A, pronounce Thorsten, and B, because of that, also they wouldn't remember the name. And so, Thorsten basically just means Thor's stone, Thorsten. So that's actually the meaning. The meaning of the name is Thor's stone. And so I was like, might as well just shorten it to Thor, and everyone remembers Thor. So it was just kind of a somewhat, back then not too strategic. It was just kind of, I was annoyed of everyone forgetting my name. And so I was like, okay, Thor, everyone remembers that. And just kind of, it's been kind of my personal brand sort of ever since. I have my hammer here as well.
Oh, nice. You also have these is it like Singapore letters in your Twitter name? Do they stand for something as well?
Yeah, so it's Chinese characters, which basically Leishan is the Chinese for Thunder God.
Okay.
So, I when I moved to Singapore, I just kind of learned how to sort of introduce myself in Mandarin, and then I just chose my Mandarin name as Thunder God.
That's very humble, very, very humble of you.
Exactly. So,
but I can totally feel
what's the lesson?
I can totally feel the naming change. My family name was Reimler, which is like in German I have to pronounce it because like is there an E or not, or what are the letters? And when I married my wife, I just took her name, basically most of the for the comfort, because it's now Grimm, and everyone knows Grimm. Yeah, it's also so like it's a brother's Grimm. So people can hopefully remember that. But this is also going to be an episode people will hopefully remember, as we will talk about Supabase. I've been a big fan of Supabase for years. I think I've been one of the really early adopters. I never recently used it in like a whole lot of production apps, but I stumbled upon it years ago. I used it for some tutorials, and I really saw that was really cool after using Firebase for years. And we will get more into Supabase, what it means, some differences to Firebase, and especially also what it means for React Native, as you've been on a streak of great content. You basically created all the content I would usually create. Really, those type of like Apple sign in with Supabase, do whatever, sign in with Supabase, push notifications with Supabase and Expo. It's really like great content. And you can hopefully share a few things about that. But before we get into all of that, could you first of all explain quickly what you did in the past at Stripe, because that was also like a big name in your CV, and what you're now doing at Supabase? Because a lot of people are DevRel, and to be honest, I still don't exactly know what they're doing. I think most of the time they also don't know. They just do their best to make everyone happy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I'm not sure how far I should go back, but yeah, Stripe, I originally joined Stripe, it's like early 2016 in Dublin. So I was kind of on the back of actually finishing up my studies.
Oh, nice.
And a friend of mine, funnily enough, a childhood friend that I grew up with in like Schwetzingen in Germany. Like probably one of the most German towns ever. It's close to Heidelberg. It's quite nice. It's there's a castle there and stuff. But so yeah, this like childhood school friend that I grew up with from across the road, and I used to do like in high school we used to do like social clubs and activities together. And so he joined Stripe quite early on in running like the Germany business in Berlin, kind of building the Germany business there. And so he knew that I had studied in Erasmus in Dublin, and he sent me a message on like Facebook back in the day when that was still a thing. And he was like, "Oh, hey, do you know any like technical native German speakers in Dublin?" And I literally just had moved back to Dublin at that time. It's like 2 weeks, he didn't know that. And I was like, "Hello, like you're basically describing me, what's up?" And so it turned out that at that time they were looking for the first German speaking hire in Dublin to like build up kind of the German speaking support team back then. And it was super interesting. I mean, like the Dublin team at that time was like 15 people in a co-working space next to like the Guinness Brewery and like Thomas Street. And then it just grew really, really quickly. And so I think, as with many things, like you got to have a lot of luck in timing, kind of, timing and place. There's a lot of luck involved in that. And so I was lucky to sort of be there when Stripe was kind of growing the Europe business. And so got involved with that. And so I had a lot of firsts at Stripe, which was really nice. So like I set up the first Wi-Fi in like the Stripe Dublin office, like when we moved into like the building, kind of the official Stripe building that they are still in now. It was terrible. There's construction going on. The Wi-Fi would like constantly drop. But yeah, that's like one of the firsts, which was quite nice. Or I was head of bins, not card bins, but garbage bins. So I, twice a week I would bring out the bins at Stripe, which was fun. It was a like good time. Do whatever's necessary.
It's so good if you'll leave behind like a little legacy. Funny story, at my last job I had, I've only been there for 3 months because I quit in the like initial period and went self-employed. But on like my second or third day, I just set up Slack because I said, "Hey, we used Slack before. You here, you need Slack," and they're still using it until today. So that's like my legacy I left behind.
Yeah. No, it's so that's been a really, really nice period. And I mean, Stripe was growing like crazy at that time, and so I was lucky that kind of as one of the first sort of technical or software engineers by trade or like technical hires in Europe, I was then sort of able to build out a lot of the like customer facing engineering role. So like at that time, all of the like product engineering was centralized in San Francisco, still with Stripe at that time. And so I got lucky that just kind of a lot of the early sort of like support engineering, field engineering, customer engineering, solutions architecture, sort of anything that's sort of like technical interfacing with the customer. And I got to like work with big marketplaces like Shopify and like fly out to their headquarters in Canada and like help them implement like the European payment methods, when that kind of became a thing as they were launching kind of into the European markets. And so kind of, basically a lot of these sort of roles that interface closely with the product development on the one hand, kind of internally, but then also kind of customer facing. I generally just call them customer facing engineering roles. And with that was actually the first time I got to go to Singapore as well, because like Singapore, the team at that time was like 2017. The team here was 8 people with Stripe. It's kind of like early Dublin days, and I was the closest technical person. Because it's sort of like Europe, Singapore is actually closer than like Singapore, US. And so they were like, "Oh, hey, Thor, can you help like Grab? Grab is like the Uber of Southeast Asia. Can you like help Grab implement 3D secure payments? Like for some reason they have like fraud and they like want 3D secure payments." And so that was the first time I got to visit Singapore, and I just I got really lucky that like in the 3 weeks that I was here, kind of helping the customer integrate. The team here, like 8 people, like some new hires as well. We like went for a team offsite in Bali,
Nice.
and so I kind of got to experience sort of this like, Singapore, like, okay, flying off to Bali for like the weekend, for the long weekend, kind of that lifestyle. And I was like, holy crap, I gotta actually move here and like figure out how to do this. And I think fast forward, that sort of happened in 2019. I moved here, then COVID happened. And then actually through some old Stripe friend that I actually went to Bali with, and on that offsite, he introduced me to Paul and Ant, like in early 2020 when they first started working
Paul
on
and Ant are the CEO and CTO of Supabase, just for the
correct
notes.
Yeah, so the co-founders. Paul generally goes by Koppel, so if you see him on Twitter, Kiwi Koppel, and Ant, and so it's funny, I met them, like he brought them, so our friend, like my ex-colleague at Stripe, he brought them into the Stripe office for lunch, and we basically sat down and they told me about the idea of Supabase. It's like, it's like Firebase, but like with Postgres and SQL. And I was like, that sounds stupid. That's a terrible idea. Like front-end developers hate SQL. Like that will never fly. That's such a stupid idea. And I was basically
that's the best indicator for a good idea.
I was basically just shitting all over their idea at that time. And, at that time, I only had just moved to Singapore, and I was like traveling a lot, sort of getting to know the local markets. And so I actually didn't look further into it at that time, which, my bad luck. But then, COVID happened and like everything locked down. And actually at that time when we first met, they didn't have auth either. So there was no auth on the stack at that time. And then after the COVID lockdown, so this was summer of 2020. And this was when they were in the Y Combinator batch. And because of COVID, they were doing it virtually from Singapore, actually, the Y Combinator. And so we met again for coffee, and they told me, oh yeah, we actually added auth, and like someone, launched us on Hacker News, and now we have like 800 databases, and it's like, ooh, wow, okay, there must be something there. But for me, it was like, okay, auth is like this hard part that like everyone implementing Stripe struggles with. Like everyone, like Stripe makes it super easy. Take the credit card, save it as a customer object. But then now you have this customer object, but you got to figure out that the person who is logged in is actually the one who is this customer and who owns this card. So like Stripe doesn't help you with that, right? Like,
No.
So that's something you have to figure out for yourself. And so I was like, yeah, this is something that a lot of, especially indie hackers and kind of struggle with. So I sat down, I was like, okay, just implemented like a simple, card, like take the card, save it to the database, and, like authorization with Supabase, simple, like kind of card management, just save your card to the backend, demo with Supabase. And I was like, oh, damn, this is actually like the easiest auth with like a database that I've ever implemented. And I was like, okay, from that point, I was just like all in. It was great because we were just kind of, every Friday we'd sit together in like a cafe in Singapore, and we'd just, 5 people around the table hacking on this. So yeah, but DevRel, okay. What does that have to do with DevRel? Yeah, I think DevRel, or just maybe the broader term like developer experience, DX, I see like developer relations as part of developer experience. And I think actually Lee Robinson from Vercel, he's built a great team over there, and he has a really good blog post on this sort of how he defines developer experience and what that kind of means. And I think there's also a term of like the experience engineering. That's sort of what we're doing. And another one is another great blog post is Swix. Swix actually here from Singapore, a good friend. He's in the US now, unfortunately. I used to play tennis with him during COVID times when he actually moved home. It was a good time.
Wasn't he doing like a lot of SvelteKit as well or something?
Yeah. I mean, he was doing like originally like Netlify, right? I think that's kind of how
Maybe,
he
yeah, maybe.
sort of did the DX. I think he built like the CLI at Netlify and a bunch of things there. Then eventually went to like AWS. I think Amplify for a while, but yeah, he's been generally doing like React stuff and yeah, Svelte stuff and just general kind of front end things. And now most recently kind of the AI engineer sort of stuff and the conference in San Francisco as well that we went to. But he has a great blog as well on like developer relations topics, and he has a really good blog post on measuring developer relations, which sort of divides kind of developer relations into these three pillars that I like to think about as sort of the product side of things. So anything that kind of makes the product easier to use, and specifically, for us, that means not necessarily building the core product. So we sometimes contribute to parts, but like we're not, contributing to the infra
Yeah,
project
makes
really.
sense.
Like those guys know what they are doing, but like we build some like client libraries, we contribute to like the Supabase CLI. So anything that just kind of makes the experience for developers of a certain category. So for example, React Native developers, like that was sort of my focus most recently. Like, okay, how can we make sure that sort of the developer experience is the best for kind of these developers in kind of the React Native ecosystem? And that starts with, okay, how do we make sure that like Supabase JS has like the correct storage interface that can be used on like React Native, right? That's kind of the first thing to start with. And then you have kind of all these different, native authentication methods and like push notifications, kind of all these things, that play into it. And so there's, the product side of things. So where we build kind of client libraries or, CLI, kind of anything that interacts with the product or like sits on top of the product and kind of makes that experience easier. But then also the documentation or in general kind of educational content. And so that is,
Right.
documentation,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is videos, that is, blog posts, what have you. And then sort of the third pillar being kind of the community side of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that as well. But I mean, we've been really lucky as well with a lot of different communities actually embracing Supabase. And so I love to kind of say we're building sort of this community of communities because there's just so, when you're having a database, which is kind of a very crucial piece to a lot of different, developers and what they are building. And so, I
Yeah,
think that's
I
kind of,
found this really funny because when you're on Twitter in certain bubbles, it kind of feels like people really love Supabase. They not just write about it in terms like, okay, Angular versus React or Next is cool or whatever. Like, it feels like there's a different spirit behind the whole Supabase community. I don't know exactly where this is coming from, and I can't really quantify it, but it's just a vibe that I get. Is that what you notice internally as well? Is it probably because of all the indie makers picking Supabase, or?
I think that definitely plays a role. I think similar to like how it was at Stripe. So at Stripe, the philosophy very much was if you build like a product that has a really, really good developer experience, and you just kind of create, the individual developer who loves your product, they will talk about it. They will basically, do open source projects around it. They will tell their friends, so like for Stripe, like in the early days, Stripe didn't have any marketing, right? Like the
Yeah.
Stripe marketing was word of mouth and press. Like that was it. And so I think we've been quite lucky that it feels quite similar at Supabase, where we focus on sort of that developer experience and making that kind of a great experience so that people are happy to talk about it. And I think that, we're very fortunate that we kind of have found that fit. And then I think in combination with, who could have known the meme marketing. I don't know if that's like
Oh
an
yeah.
official term now, but that is a very specific skill as well. And I think a lot of the credit here goes to Ant Wilson, who actually is maybe like the, at least at Supabase, sort of the godfather of the meme marketing. because it is such a specific skill. You need to be highly technical to like kind of come up with, you know, the humor behind it, but then also you need to have that very specific humor. So it actually is a crazy kind of skill set to have, like developer meme marketing.
I've been there as well. I tried it a few times. I actually had a few successful memes, but it's unbelievable hard to like
Yeah.
stay on top of the game. Like I know a lot of memes from years of knowledge, but there are like always new memes coming up. I mean, for a while I was following PewDiePie and his meme review, and you get like all the new stuff. But at some point I just couldn't follow, and you really need to spend time on like what's the latest meme, and then how can I combine this with a technical idea. Sometimes you have a technical idea and use the search for the meme, but anyway, we're already pretty deep down in Supabase, in DevRel, and everything. I just want to take a moment to take like 5 steps back to a broad overview about Supabase for everyone who has maybe not used it, not heard about it before. So when I got in touch with Supabase, I knew your headline was Supabase is the Firebase open source alternative. It is still in your subtitle, but you changed it. Like the header is now built in a weekend scale to millions, which I guess targets kind of like indie makers, but tells the story of you can also build something really great with us. But from the outside perspective, people generally know about Firebase because it's been the first really great tool. But what is the difference between Firebase and Supabase? If you can like easily tell us the different elements.
Yeah. I think actually, you know, it's funny because sometimes people tell us like, oh, you shouldn't have, you know, called this the open source alternative to Firebase. It's like nothing like Firebase. You know, it's a terrible tagline, and you know, some people's like, I didn't use Supabase for years because you associate it with Firebase, but like this is actually great, and they're like, yeah, sorry, but you know, just the simple fact is that it's kind of a Y Combinator thing where you sort of come up with, you know, like the X alternative to Y, sort of kind of that, right? Like,
That's like a specific thing in Y Combinator.
yeah, I think like you see that a lot with kind of Y Combinator type companies. So sort of this like very brief elevator, you know, not even elevator pitch. It's like the
It makes it
elevator
easy.
door opening pitch, right? So like you convey a lot of information to like your target audience with, you know, a very short tagline. And then also, you know, like for us in terms of SEO, it was the killer, you know, like it literally created so much traffic, this tagline, that you know, I think that is the main reason why we've been holding on for it so long, because it just really performed so well. But yeah, it is, you know, an alternative to Firebase in that sense that, you know, what you do with Firebase is generally you use it as a backend, as a service to kind of build your web or mobile applications, right? And you generally use it for, you know, sort of structured data. So, you know, in that case, it's a NoSQL kind of data store. You use it for authentication. You use it for file storage. You know, you use it for some kind of function runtime things. So generally, yeah, backend as a service. So in that sense, you know, it's true. Like Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative, but you know, otherwise, it is, you know, not a NoSQL database. So it is very much a SQL database, relational database. The foundation of kind of everything at Supabase is Postgres, and Postgres, you know, likely for 95% of projects that you're building, Postgres will be kind of a good choice. You know, there's certain scenarios like rate limiting and kind of things like that, where, you know, a relational database just doesn't make sense, right? And that's where you choose something like Redis on top of it, or, you know, besides it, generally. But you know, for most applications, in most scenarios, like Postgres will be a good choice. And the reason we chose Postgres is Postgres is incredibly powerful, and Postgres itself is actually kind of a marketplace, because you have kind of all these extensions that exist on top of Postgres. And so, you know, things as well like the role level security policies. This is a native kind of built-in thing within Postgres, and so, in a way, you know, Postgres is kind of the cheat code to Supabase that kind of is the foundation And we generally like to say kind of we're cheating by using the power of Postgres. Where like some of our competitors have like built their own kind of databases, or made them like serverless databases or things like that. We're all in on Postgres and really giving you kind of the full power of Postgres, which also means like if you're building a Ruby on Rails application that you used to run on like Heroku, right? Like you can use Supabase for that because we give you the full kind of Postgres instance, right? Like, but then what we're doing is basically on top of Postgres, we give you an entire open source stack of useful tools that you might need. And so that is, for example, for authentication is the GoTrue server. So GoTrue is an authentication server originally written by Netlify, actually for the Jamstack world. If you can believe that, that used to exist a couple of years ago, Jamstack. And so it's an open source project. We've since kind of forked off from that. But of course, still open source. And so that is what we're using to generate the sessions and the JWT based user sessions. And then obviously these are stored on an authentication schema in the Postgres database. So Postgres is your foundation. And then, you have the authentication that sits on top of it. You have the file storage, and then the file storage plugs again in with the Postgres database, in that all the metadata, so all the structured data about your files are stored in Postgres in a storage schema. And then that again plugs together with the authentication component, where you can then restrict access to files based on the metadata using row-level security policies. So, we have kind of this idea, everything is open source. B, kind of every part of Supabase needs to be useful on its own, as well as self-hostable on its own. But then when you put all the pieces together, when you plug it all together, it becomes a force multiplier. So every piece of the Supabase stack is usable and useful and self-hostable on its own. But once you plug all the pieces together, it just becomes such a force multiplier. And so again, with like the edge functions runtime, so that's open source Dino runtime. So we chose Dino back then as well, because it is fully open source, which allows you to actually do a self-hostable experience as well as like a local experience that is completely identical to like the hosted experience. And then again, you have the authentication that plugs in with the Edge runtime and with the database, so you can connect to the database from the Edge runtime. You have things like database webhooks, where you can actually trigger functions from the database. And so, everything is its own. Everything is open source, but everything is connected. And so that's kind of, I guess, the idea. Yeah,
it's not the elevator pitch, but it's the extended elevator pitch, I guess. So yeah, that was a lot that I would like to unpack. By the way, in the meantime, I looked up. So Simon was an early adopter. It was March 2021 that I released how to integrate Supabase in your Ionic app. So if you said you started summer 2020, March 2021 was pretty early, I guess, for Supabase. I still remember at that time, as I said, you were like the alternative to Firebase, and people kind of disliked Firebase for different reasons. Sometimes you were not sure like how much you're going to pay. There were articles like, oh, I lost like $30,000 because I made a wrong query to my database. But you were still limited at that point. I remember there was like the database, and I think, not even authentication in the beginning. That came soon after. And people always said like, I don't know, should we use Supabase? It doesn't have everything. At this point, right now, here in, I guess this episode is going live in 2024, does Supabase cover everything that Firebase has, or are there reasons why people could like still say, I would pick Firebase over Supabase? I will not make the thing about NoSQL or SQL, because that's like, by the way, Simon always used NoSQL simply because he was too lazy to create like SQL statements and stuff. I just used MongoDB all the time. It worked for me, and that's like the maker spirit. If it works, why should I change it? But I've been convinced different now. So is it like on par with Firebase at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are certain parts, right? Like the Firebase suite is pretty extensive, and there are certain parts, like for example, push notifications, where, and I think I actually read this earlier, and I need to look up if this is true, that some court actually now ruled that the Google Play Store is a monopoly, and if that is the case, then it might actually change like the pricing structure soon enough, if it's actually ruled to be, a monopoly that needs to be
Oh,
broken up. But so similar, to like the Play Store. So if you want to send a push notification to an application that is distributed through the Play Store, you have to use Firebase Cloud Messaging. Like there
right.
is no other way to do this, right? And so that
I
was
mean,
kind
there are
of for me,
services like One Signal and stuff, but you always have to come back to
yeah,
this one FCM ID from Firebase.
exactly. And actually, for me, when I started looking into React Native, that was like, I didn't actually realize that was the case. I was like, I got WebSockets, I got, what I can. And
Nice try.
it blew my mind. It was like, oh wow, okay, no, this is actually, yeah, you have to use Apple push notification. Like, yes, in terms of like protecting the consumer and the consumer device, yes, it does make sense that you have a standard, and like if everyone were to implement their own push stuff, the battery life of your phone would be very bad. But it was still kind of mind-boggling to me. So yeah, so for example, something like push notifications, we're thinking about like a foreign data wrapper kind of thing, where you can actually then trigger push notifications via like SQL queries, but you would still basically provide your like Apple credentials and your Google cloud messaging credentials. You would put them in like the Supabase vault, but then you could use like a foreign data wrapper to basically just trigger push notifications by writing SQL. So that's kind of something we're
Would
thinking
probably
about.
be interesting, but I would also think it's like an edge case for Supabase. Like, not everyone's using Supabase is doing mobile
Yeah.
apps.
No. No, that's true. Although, like, mobile apps are an interesting use case because mobile developers tend to be quite sticky customers, and then also thanks to the app stores, they actually have easier ways to monetize their applications oftentimes, and so mobile developers actually sometimes make better customers for us, which is interesting as well, because like if you take something like the whole web ecosystem now is like going back to the PHP days, like everything's
Yeah.
going back to the server, which is quite interesting. So we used to have the kind of Jamstack world where you would have your APIs, and then you would have your clients, and then they would do the HX thing and get their stuff through the APIs. So now that is like, forget that. Next.js is now React server components and all of that, and it's an interesting movement. I like to call it sort of the back to PHP movement. No, I mean, I get it, but like at the same time, so by kind of doing that, and now you're sort of fetching all the data actually server side, right? You don't actually need an API anymore, and so actually what a lot of these frameworks, so if you look at like kind of these new React stacks, oftentimes people use things like Drizzle, kind of these like type-safe ORMs or Prisma or kind of these things. And these ORMs, they connect directly to the database, meaning you don't actually need an API. Yeah. In a way, you're kind of, because you're doing server components, you actually don't really have an API anymore. You kind of render your thing server side. Which on the flip side also makes your database provider very interchangeable, right? Like if you're using something like Drizzle, you can plug in any like PlanetScale,
Neon.
any
I've used a few,
MySQL,
yeah.
Postgres, and you can plug in anything that has a connection string, right? Like pretty easily. And so a lot of the power of like the entire Supabase stack, so a lot of the power of like the role level security policies and like the authentication, kind of all this interconnectedness, kind of goes away with sort of that approach. And so mobile developers are great because they actually, in a way, live in the Jamstack world, because they have their static, clients that then need to use some sort of API to get components, to get data. And so actually what I didn't mention earlier is that Supabase gives you an auto-generated API, both a REST API as well as a GraphQL API, to interact with your database directly from the client side. And so that's actually what makes Supabase such a great fit for something like React Native or mobile applications in general, because you actually get kind of the whole server environment, kind of the secure server environment in the form of a scalable serverless API, rather than having to build that yourself.
Yeah, I think that's actually what brought me to Firebase, like in 2014 or something. Like, I just want to build my app and focus on the app and see quick results. And I don't want to spin up a Node.js API or Java or whatever. And plugging in Firebase was so unbelievable easy at that time. It was really like, at that point, it was still new. And I had a conference talk about this, like, and in that conference talk, in like about 45 minutes, I built this cloud to do application, and everyone was like, wow, this is amazing. And now we got Supabase and all the alternatives, and we just accept them as like, yeah, cool, they exist. But you should really like stop for a moment and say, like, this is really amazing. Like, it takes probably 10 minutes to integrate Supabase and authentication in your React Native app. It's like, it's really that easy. You won't have all the functionalities, but like 75%, you're going to probably get automatically out of the box. So I still got a long list of questions for you, because as you just mentioned, going back to PHP, there's also a trend in React Native or in the mobile world of going offline first again with the database, simply because it gives a better user experience. Like, everything happens at a snap, and then you update stuff in the background. Not even because like people don't have a connection in some countries that's the case, but like in Europe, US, you usually have a connection. But it's just making the apps a whole lot faster if you have an offline first database approach and then replicate it back. I know you had a post with Dominic, who's also from Germany. I think Dominic was also on the podcast. We talked about that as well.
Yeah.
You had a post
Benedict,
on Supabase. Right? Benedict. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Are you planning anything like from the Supabase side that targets offline first? Because I think when I used Firebase, there was like also offline caching. You could just enable this with something. Do you plan something with that with Supabase for React Native?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the unfortunate thing with like the whole offline first is there are a lot of different ways of approaching this problem, and when you actually boil down to the whole conflict resolution side of things, it actually becomes quite challenging. So yes, we are looking into a couple different ways to sort of build that directly into something like the JavaScript client libraries or the mobile client libraries, but it's not something that will happen, very soon. So the thing is, there are some, like, if you really care about like the offline first approach, there are like certain ways to achieve this. Some with like Watermelon DB as an example. There's PowerSync, which is kind of a paid service that is focusing on this experience specifically. I think Electric SQL is an interesting one that I haven't dug into it too much yet. That seems quite promising. So there are a couple of players that are specifically looking at this right now. Then there's a couple of open source projects. Another one is Legend State, which is a very interesting one. So they actually built, I think the offline kind of syncing with Firebase, and they are looking at kind of doing the same thing with Supabase as well. So Legend State is an interesting project to kind of keep eyes on. And was there another one? Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I think like React Query and like React Query in combination with like use cache helpers. So like there's a bunch of open source projects kind of looking at this. And so, I think the short answer is we're looking at it, but it's not going to be a native Supabase solution anytime soon.
Yeah, fair enough. But I would hope to see something in the future, because all the setup I've seen so far is like It's as complicated as it sounds. That's basically my assumption about it. I want to talk more about Supabase in combination with Expo, but I also have a lot of questions. So I just want to give you a few questions, and you're going to give me short answers so we can wrap them up. I appreciate
I'll try.
all the great answers I had so far, but I really want to have some answers too. Okay, so first of all, Firebase is of course like your competitor. I don't know if you would internally call it competitor, but from my point of view, the thing that comes after Supabase is AppWrite. I don't know if this is like in numbers correct, but at least from my bubble, it feels like Supabase and AppWrite are like the big names currently as an alternative to Firebase. So could you like describe the difference between Supabase and AppWrite for people like unsure what they should use? And I know, of course, you're from Supabase, and you won't say that AppWrite is the best thing on earth, but there are probably some cool things about AppWrite as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to say I probably don't know enough about AppWrite to actually give you a fair comparison there. I think, like from what I know, it's sort of a PHP-based project. I think also the database is not Postgres.
It's like a hybrid combination of SQL and NoSQL.
So I think short answer, we're betting on the power of Postgres, and I think if that resonates with you, then check out Supabase.
You also mentioned Postgres extensions before. Could you give us like 3 examples of like the most popular extensions? I don't know if you have numbers, but from your feelings.
Yeah. PostGIS is actually a great one. So geospatial queries. So if you're doing anything like geo-related, like any map kind of integrations, especially in mobile apps, right? That's very popular. So
I think somebody did a tutorial on that.
It was me. I think Tyler. Was it you? There you go. Check out this Simon guy. He's got a tutorial on it. Was that PostGIS specifically, or?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
I
was using it and like some remote procedures and stuff going. Yeah, that was fun.
Oh damn! Okay, we gotta.
It was with Ionic, I think.
Yeah, maybe we can resample that with React. That'd be
100%.
cool. Yeah, let's do that. PostGIS is a great one. I mean, I think there's one that's kind of enabled by default, which is like PGNet, or it's just an HTTP communication layer for the database. So that actually is what powers the database webhooks, for example. So when you enable database webhooks, it's basically just a collection of extensions in the background where, I mean, PG cron is another one. I think that's a great one that's sort of built in. And then, I mean, most recently, the PG vector. The AI vector extension for kind of AI-related workloads. So again, fully open source project, kind of happened sort of by accident by someone in the community, like sending an email where they were like, oh, hey, can you enable this on like the hosted platform? That would be really cool. There's someone as Greg Richardson who now kind of leads the AI stuff at Supabase. So like, it starts with an email, and I mean the open source world is pretty incredible.
Yeah, you had like a whole launch week on AI stuff where some creators like Vadim from Not Just Dev, and I also created AI stuff. That was totally fun as well. So there are going to be a lot of videos on that as well on YouTube. All right, next question. I know on Firebase there's Firebase hosting. So for some reasons I sometimes used Firebase hosting to upload my like PWAO website. Anything like that planned for Supabase?
No, not for the time being. And the biggest thing is that there are a lot of providers out there who have a really, really good experience for this, right? And like to even just match up to that experience, that is a lot of work. The other thing is that there was actually a time where you were able to kind of host websites on Supabase storage. And that actually almost landed us on, I think it actually landed us on a block list because people were hosting their spam. No, not actually their spam, their phishing websites. So they were hosting their bank phishing websites on Supabase storage, like in the early days when we first launched the storage product. And I think like after the infra team spending, I don't know how many hours of like getting the Supabase domain back off of like the block lists of like all the big internet providers. I think you have to be very, very careful about building a hosting product because people will host literally anything and everything if they can. And so I think there is no immediate plans in kind of focusing on this experience and making that really great, because I think to make that really great, A, it takes a lot of resources, and then B, there are a lot of players out there and, close partners of ours as well that do this really, really well. So I think for now, it's very much a partnership play.
Yeah. Also, that's why we can't have cool things. I still remember when I think Fireship did a little tutorial on something using Pocket. Was it Pocket Base, or what's the name of this like self-hosted thing? And then
Could be.
like people submitted so much spam and it crashed, and like his Linode server, and it's just all the same all the time. Anyway, next question. I know you can self-host Supabase, but in the past I've always seen Reddit posts about this, pointing some negative light on this. Like, yes, you can it, but it's insanely hard to pull it off. I personally haven't tried it. I'm happy to pay $25 per month to have the backend of galaxies.dev hosted on Supabase, user authentication, and all the fun that comes with Supabase. But if I wanted to self-host this, maybe for like EU reasons, some laws, is it that hard? What's the current like? Be honest. What's the real state? Is it hard, or is it like realistic to do it?
That you caught me there, because I actually haven't set it up myself either. That's a fair point. I know that we've focused on making that easier, and we've actually shipped like what is it? Droplets. Which provider has the droplets?
DigitalOcean?
DigitalOcean, yes. So we've actually partnered with DigitalOcean on like making kind of the droplet hosting. So I think that is fairly plug and play. Obviously that sort of might be limited to DigitalOcean. But yes, so I know, if you were to do something like DigitalOcean droplet self-hosting, it should actually be quite straightforward. But yeah, I actually have to say I haven't vetted the self-hosting experience enough to confidently say that it is easy. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of your value proposition that you piece together all these things like the database, the go-through service. And yes, of course you can do this. Like, what's the saying? Linux is free if you don't value your time. And it's basically the same for Supabase, I guess.
Yeah. All
right. These are most of my quick questions that I wanted to answer. Some probably the last one being something a bit spicy, because people always tend to ask us like, oh, it's a cool project, but no real company is using this. Like, yeah, this is only for side projects, and then eventually you're going to move into something like real. Are real companies using Supabase?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yes, I think they very much are. I need to be careful now in terms of like the logos that we can actually name. But I think we can talk about like, so for example, one of the bigger ones being Retool, for example. So Retool actually is a white label on top of Supabase. So using the management APIs, Retool actually spins up Supabase databases on your behalf. So when you in Retool, I think when you spin up like a Postgres database in Retool, they actually use the API to like spin up a Supabase project. So, for example, I think there's actually a blog post about the announcement somewhere. So that is true. I'm not lying on that one. There are a couple larger kind of these like enterprise things in the pipeline as well. But like some of them I can't talk about. Maybe some of the ones I personally like Mobbin, Very much probably still considered a startup, but actually gotten some really nice traction. So Mob and Design, they are sort of like a screenshot database of like apps. So to give you inspiration of like, if you're building like mobile apps, and they actually based here in Singapore, and started not too long ago, and,
What a
and started on
coincidence.
Supabase. Yeah, no, it's a great project. You probably wouldn't call it an enterprise, right? But like it is a successful, high traffic, kind of high user based project. I think another one, Pepperly as well. I think they've grown to like an insane amount of users, like a million
One
users in
seven, yeah, one
or
million users in 7 months with Supabase
something
auth.
like
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
Shotgun, Happy Teams, Epsilon. I mean, I don't recognize them as like the big brands, but they are also around for longer and already have their database. So there's not really probably a reason to
yeah.
migrate to Supabase for I don't
I
know.
mean, what one thing that is interesting is like the whole vector database space, which is somewhat a shortcut into the enterprise world. So we got folks like Mozilla when they built their like AI assistant on top of like the MDN docs. So they are using PG Vector for that, like Supabase. You like disclaimer, they are also an investor in Supabase, which actually is a bit strange if you think about it. I think they didn't do that for too long, or I'm not sure if they still do the investment arm of Mozilla. But so like maybe take that with a grain of salt. Obviously they would be using their investment, but yeah, there's other kind of larger players, I think, who are like experimenting with the vector database side of things. So yeah, I mean, the revenue side of things is growing. Obviously, I can't talk about numbers here, but
Yeah.
like that gives you an indicator as well as to that there are projects, that are scaling and growing on Supabase and are successful and actually financially successful, so that they can pay us money, which is great, and ideally where we want to
Right.
end up more.
I mean, technically, it's still kind of early days for Supabase. So if it was like 2020, you started 21, it's like the first real release, and now it's 24. Firebase has been around a lot longer, and everything else as well. So I'm excited to see
Yeah.
where this is going. Um,
And we're
bringing this
still in
back,
beta, actually. Well, good point,
really?
actually. But yeah. So like we're not even GA yet, Well, maybe by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know more. But yeah, I mean, obviously there are like certain things, and I think in this launch week, we'll see a couple things. So right now, while we're recording this, actually launch week X is happening.
Yeah, I already
And
saw some updates to the studio and AI assistant role level
yeah.
security prompts. There's probably going to be a whole lot more. What I'm curious about is Supabase in combination with React Native. So when I reached out like a couple of months ago, you said there were some rough edges with Supabase and React Native. You probably noticed it yourself. I think it was mostly around authentication, uh, probably about something else as well. So how well does Supabase work with React Native right now in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's actually a really nice experience now. And, I don't want to take too much credit because, like, there's
No.
folks like yourself, Simon, and or Simon, and Benedict as well, I think, who've been, like, great trailblazers, I think is a good word to call it, to, like, actually sort of iron out those kinks. And so when I focused a bit more on the React Native experience, a lot of it was just kind of putting all the pieces that you've already sort of figured out for yourselves and putting them together, where we can, incorporating them into the client libraries, and then B, just, like improving the documentation on a lot of these things. And so I think now, like, yeah, I think you can very much build a great React Native application on top of Supabase, and yeah, I'm actually hoping to maybe build like a real life application and actually like put it into usage. Not like commercially, obviously, like build something open source, as like a Supabase showcase, but something that actual people use. That's sort of my dream, to actually have like a project that has a certain amount of traffic, to like have like a real life test bed, because
Every DevRel needs to have a dream.
that's a thing. Like, and I think actually the Vercel folks have. I admired them for a long time in how they did kind of the side project things, next to like their day job, and like I'd actually would love to figure out something kind of similar at Supabase, but obviously there's always inherently, if you have like monetized side projects, it's like an inherent competition to your job, and like so still trying to figure that out, like what that can look like. But obviously there's a huge benefit in running an actual business on top of Supabase and having that experience, rather than like oftentimes you just feel like an imposter where you're like getting started with Supabase, but then when it comes to running an actual business, like, don't know about that. So yeah, that's
yeah, I can definitely vote for that. So I feel quite good about Galaxies having Supabase as the backend. So it works really great for user authentication. We have, of course, subscriptions with Stripe, using the webhooks. I don't know, we're using the storage for file upload. We have GitHub integrations, and it just really works really nicely. Our front end is, for reference, it's SvelteKit.
Doesn't work,
so I think we had in the beginning some issues, like I noticed at some point that the page was getting really, really slow, and I had like, I don't know, 50 members or something, and I said, that can't be true. Like there's a problem here. And then we noticed that some graph in the dashboard of Supabase was like, after 2 days of the period starts, I was already maxed out. I don't know, it was like CPU usage or something. I was like, what's going on? There's certainly something wrong. And then we figured out that we kind of needed to cache something related to auth, that we did like an auth check on every load of a page in SvelteKit, and we figured that out. And since then, I didn't have any problem with Supabase. It just works really, really great. Like if members say something, they have a problem with their subscription, I can just quickly look them up. I can change their ID in the SQL database. It just works really, really great. But nice. In terms of React Native, I still remember that one problem especially is if you're using something like passwordless authentication, you get like an email with a link. You jump to your email provider, you click that link, and then you're in like a website, but you kind of want to be in your React Native application. Did you already improve that flow, which means you kind of need to use something like deep links or a URL scheme or universal links?
Yeah. So that's already in the docs. Actually, there is a video on it as well. So yeah, there's a video on it specifically for deep linking. If you want to take it like even further, right? I think dynamic linking is sort of the where you use kind of both web links that then kind of act as deep links, right? So like I think dynamic linking is a bit more difficult to set up, but yeah, it's like the standard deep linking to make like the auth, the passwordless auth work. That's already in the docs, and that should be pretty straightforward now.
Nice. And also about native authentication. So sign in with Apple, sign in with Google. I know there are two ways to do this. So one way is to open up a browser and like do the process in the browser and then come back to the app. Or there's actually the native way, which is like on Apple, it just opens this little bottom sheet, or for Google, it's also. Which way works with Supabase?
Yes, so both works. And actually the docs are defaulting to the native experience. Now, I think I only tested this out with Expo, and I think Expo specifically has a library for kind of the native Apple sheet. Mm-hmm. So I'm not entirely sure if it's a bit more difficult if you're doing a bare React Native. But so the general flow is you basically have to use some library to use the native thing to get your token. But like once you have that token, kind of everything works as documented. And so, yeah, we have it documented with Expo. and the native flow both for like Apple and Google. So for Apple, Expo has an official library, and then for Google, there is a community maintained library, and so we're now also sponsoring the contributor, the maintainer, who's working on that, because they've done some really great work there. And yeah, so no brainer.
This
there.
definitely sounds like I should do a new project with React Native and Supabase in 2024. It sounds like you're totally ready now.
Yeah, we're ready. Let's make it happen. Let's build something.
Yeah, I actually know.
Big.
I know about your dream and what that application could or might look like. So we're gonna talk about that as well. We're already at an hour mark, so we're gonna wrap this up soonish. I would just like to finish with two questions. So the one is a more personal question, and that is just, what do you personally like the most about Supabase? I mean, you're a DevRel and you've used pretty much every piece. And in the beginning, you said authentication was made a lot easier. But now, after like 3-4 years, what from your personal point of view, what's the coolest thing about Supabase?
It's a good question. There's a lot of cool things. I think my heart is sort of in the edge functions world. And I think the reason is because some of it is still quite experimental. And the guys working on the edge runtime, there's like deep Rust code. I have like no idea what's going on, but it's just very inspiring to kind of see that kind of work happening. And, it's all open source, obviously. So, so I really love that we're kind of we could have gone sort of the easy way of just use some like the Cloudflare work engine or like some, Node or what have you kind of. But I love that we sort of okay, no, we want to figure this out, open source experience. And we really like kind of what the Dino team was doing there. And so, I think personally, my heart is sort of in that.
That's so cool. I didn't expect that answer, but I can totally see it. And I actually watched one of your videos on setting up Dino environment in Visual Studio Code. To be honest, I didn't completely get it. And my whole setup was completely messed up afterwards, and everything was red underlines, and Dino did not work, Expo did not work. So many pros. So if you can maybe do another tutorial on the idiot mode for having a Dino environment next to my React Native project, that would be really cool. Or next to any other project for that. And finally, we had the launch week 10 in December, which is happening right now as we record this. But what is coming to Supabase in 2024? I mean, you can't say everything. You're probably not even part of the teams that do all the magic. But do you have an idea where Supabase is heading in 2024 in terms of their priorities or things they want to add to their services?
Yeah. I think that's an exciting question. And yeah, I mean, the thing is, the rate of shipping nowadays is it's just mind-boggling.
Insane.
Even internally to stay up to date with everything that's happening. It's just, I think nowadays actually this past launch week X, we had a build stage and a main stage, because now we're actually shipping twice as much per week. And I think after that we have an advent calendar with all the things that didn't make it into the main stage and the build stage. But I think one thing that's really exciting is doubling down on the branching experience. So I think that's something that just folks come to expect now, sort of branching environments and that. So there's some exciting work going on there, and also in the most recent launch week, it's been opened up to kind of everyone. Fingers crossed that that's actually happening. So branching, and the other part being sort of the serverless Postgres. So we're actually partnering with the folks at Oriole DB, and so these are some hardcore low-level storage layer, programmers that actually work on making the storage layer of Postgres plug and play. So that's something that Neon has done, but in somewhat a proprietary way. So the way they've done is it's from what I understand, it's not possible to merge it back into the actual open source Postgres project.
Okay.
And so what we've basically said, okay, these guys are working on kind of the same thing. These to give you some context, what Neon does is kind of the read on, what is it called? Copy on write sort of experience, where they actually very quickly and cheaply switch out the storage layer of your database, and also can wake that up pretty quickly. So you get sort of the different staging environments very cheaply, and you can scale down to zero, sort of all the serverless, all the truly serverless stuff. And so so these guys are working on upstreaming this approach of the decoupled storage layer to the actual Postgres open source project. And that is a big project with 30 years of history. So that does take some time. But yeah, I think once that lands, that is quite exciting.
And then you will probably be out of beta in 2024 as well. And maybe at some point also drop the line of being the Supabase, the open source alternative to Firebase. I mean, yeah, I kind of feel those people, it was a good line in the beginning, but at this point I feel like Supabase is so much more. It's so different. It's having a different vibe. And if you if you maybe need it for SEO reasons, then okay. But otherwise, I feel like you deserve a new vibe of this maker community and people just building cool stuff with Supabase.
Yeah. I agree.
All right. That was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people find more about you or Supabase? Any links that we should put in the show notes?
Yeah, definitely link up the Twitters. So at Supabase. And then generally you can find me as Thor Web Dev, which is sort of my online persona. Easy to remember. Although the web is somewhat fluent. Sometimes I dabble in the mobile dev, but yeah, just Thor Web Dev.
Yeah, I mean, web developers are also mobile developers these days, especially listeners to this podcast. So thanks for listening. If you want more guidance, check out galaxies.dev, where at this point, it's probably not yet the Supabase course release, but I definitely have it planned. It's on my roadmap. So Supabase course will come to galaxies.dev very, very soon. Again, thank you, Thor, for taking the time, and catch you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.